Good morning, everybody. I am going to talk about the view from the southwest and give you my aspirations, our aspirations for what we'd like to see in the white paper. Now, as many of you know, sometimes I speak on behalf of the industry as the chairman of Water UK, but I'd just like to stress this time it's South West Water and South West Water I'm talking about, and not the industry. So this is just a very brief outline of what I'll talk through. I'll give you some background as I see it to the industry. I'll give you some flavour of the challenges ahead, and they will give some examples to say what we would like to see in the white paper. And there will be a bit of commonality to what Martin has just said. So just looking at the background first, I mean, the first and the most important point is that this industry has achieved the objectives of privatisation. That's commonly accepted by many people, pretty much all of the people in the industry. And when I say the industry, I don't just mean the companies have achieved the objectives of privatisation. I mean the industry in the round. That's regulators, investors, customers in the round, I think, has achieved the objectives. So we've met the EU directives in terms of drinking water quality and environmental quality. No longer are we regarded as the dirty man of Europe. We've also been funded entirely from the private sector, very efficient funding arrangements coming entirely from the private sector, and indeed we have mitigated the price impacts by ever-increasing efficiencies within the industry. And I think the whole thing has been very successfully managed by depoliticising, so it's not a question of political interference. That's given investors confidence, allowed them to invest in the industry. So my starting point for this session is to say that this is a successful industry. It's a very solid foundation. It's got a successful industry of delivering the government's agenda. A very solid foundation. So turning to what I see as the challenges ahead, and I guess I would focus them into these high-level messages, and overwhelmingly important, as Martin's already said, from my perspective, from our perspective in the southwest, climate change and a growing population is the challenge facing us. Overlaying that is our customer expectations. They're no longer willing to tolerate failures and risks in the same way as they might have done in years gone by, and their ability and willingness to pay is diminishing. So put on top of that the fact that the industry continues to be cash negative, the investment is going to continue to meet these challenges going forward, and to some extent since privatisation we have had balance sheet engineering, re-engineering to mitigate the price impacts. Now our capacity to do that going forward has been diminished. So I think these are the main challenges, high-level challenges facing the industry going forward. And I guess if I could put them into sort of two pillars, I would suggest, notwithstanding Mark's introduction, I would suggest that resilience in the round, protecting our services in the round, together with affordability are the two pillars of the challenges ahead. Affordability means not only what our customers can afford, but what we as a nation can afford to deliver. So I reckon that's pretty much the challenges facing us ahead. I'm going to concentrate more on resilience because my colleague Monica Reid, who's our Customer Services Director, is going to talk to you this afternoon about affordability in the Southwest, and we do feel we're a little bit on the front edge of that debate. So talking about resilience, this is a slide from Professor John Beddington. You may well have seen it before, but Professor John Beddington, in case you don't know, is the Government Chief Scientific Advisor. This is taken from one of his presentations quite recently, but it also forms the basis of advice that he gave to ministers when the new coalition government came in. And what John Beddington is saying there is quite clear, which is by 2030, the world is going to need 50% more food, 50% more energy, and 30% more water. And overlaying against those pressures and those demands is dealing with climate change as well. To me, that is the big challenge facing the industry going forward, and that is one we will ignore at our peril. And I've got to say that's the focus of our mind in the Southwest. So as I say, I'm going to talk about climate change and how we deal with the resilience to climate change. I guess you're all pretty much familiar with plots like this. This is showing the average mean temperatures since whatever it is there, 1772. The red line shows you the trend overall, and as you can see in recent years it's been quite a significant change upwards. I'm not a climate change expert. I don't pretend to be a climate change expert. What I do know is that some panels of climate change experts say quite clearly that this trend of increasing temperatures is probably something to do with man's activities. I don't know about that. What I do know about is the next statistic there, which is if you look at the hottest 10 years on record since 1659, every single person in this room has lived through the 9 of the 10 hottest years on record since 1659. To me, that is not a coincidence. 9 out of 10 years of the hottest years you've all lived through. So what do the experts actually say is going to happen to us down in the southwest? Now this is the latest climate change models from the climate change experts. This is the median case. So this is looking at temperatures in the summer. They're saying by 2080, the median temperatures, so the median, not the worst case, the median is our temperatures are going to increase by 3.9%. As you can see, some of the impacts on the right there, you're going to see increased heat stress, infrastructure stress, and food stress, and so forth. The summer rainfall is forecast to decrease by about a quarter in the same time. So that's going to reduce the amount of water available in rivers, river qualities and so forth. More likelihood of droughts, more water stress. Conversely, the winter precipitation is going to go up by 23% by 2080. Again, we're going to see more floods, more extremes of weather hitting us. So I don't know, but I did hear a presentation from a climate change expert the other day giving a whole summary of all of that. It took about an hour and a half. Then he summarized it by saying we're going to see more weather. We're going to see more volatile weather patterns. So we're going to see more extremes of weather. And I've got to say, certainly from my experience in the Southwest in the last 5 years, it certainly feels like, I don't know it's scientific evidence, I know it certainly feels like we're seeing these more extremes of weather. This is the north coast of Cornwall 3 years ago. That's a fairly dramatic storm. Beneath that big wave is one of our pumping stations, and our customers expected, and indeed got in this case, no interruption to their service. They expect us to be able to deal with these things. We've seen floods. You're probably all aware of the Boscastle flood. There's another flood in the southeast of Cornwall last winter just gone. Flash floods in our area, strong flash floods that go straight through a catchment and cause enormous damage to us and to the people living there. We've also had droughts. This is the last drought in the southwest. Martin, I don't know where your statistics came from, but that's probably from the Environment Agency. But in terms of our statistics, the last drought we had in the southwest was in 1995. And the last standpipes and water restrictions was in 1976 there. So we weren't a drought-affected area in the year gone by. I've got to say, as an aside, our PR people hated me putting that photograph up. They said, you can't possibly put that photograph up because common perception, as Martin has just exemplified, common perception in the media and our customers is that we had a drought last year, we had water restrictions, and we spent all summer explaining to our customers and to the media, no, we haven't, we won't have any water restrictions. And they said, if you put a picture of standpipes up, that'll just reinforce the prejudice. They said, well, if you're going to do that, you must put a date on the bottom of it. So as you can see, I've dutifully put a date on the bottom of it. But I'm not sure any of you would have thought that's how the best well-dressed women in the Southwest dress in 2011. So I'm not absolutely sure we needed to put a date on it, but there we are. So I just want to give you some practical example, a practical feel of how this runs out into practice. So I'm going to talk, as Martin did quite a lot, just about the water side of the business. Obviously, I could have done an equally similar example in the wastewater side of the business. But in terms of the supply-demand challenge, I guess pretty much all of you in the room will be fairly familiar with the balance here, but what that chart is trying to show is that we can give a very secure supply of water to our customers at the lowest possible cost, but that will be at the detriment to the environment. Or conversely, we could give a very secure supply of water to our customers without affecting the environment at a very high cost. And it's all about balancing those competing pressures. When you put climate change on top of that, it gets a whole lot more complicated. As Martin said, as I'll go on to amplify in a moment, I mean, the environment itself is already stressed because of climate change. The rivers are not in a position to receive more water, more wastewater. So already we've got more constraints on us. And the economy is not just about pound notes anymore. It's not just about how much it costs. There's things such as carbon accounting. We will need to introduce more environmentally friendly energy generations. So we're bound to see more hydro generation and so forth. So this thing gets a whole lot more complicated. And I wanted to just give you a very simple and practical example of what this means actually when we're doing our water resource management plan. So this is a simplified version of our water resource management plan. So this is looking at the water available for use over a 30-year horizon. As you can see, it's a flat line. Now, we already know that things like the habitats directives are going to reduce the amount of water available for use. That's already a constraint on us. If you superimpose on that what happens with climate change, the water available for use for us is steadily coming down for all sorts of reasons. Now again, plot on top of that what's happening to demand. Population is increasing, per capita consumption is increasing. So you can already see there's quite an alarming gap appearing over a 30-year period. Put on top of that climate change will also increase the amount of demand from our customers. You can see what's happening. By about 2030, the gap that we have to meet is growing from what we might currently see to something quite startling in 2030. So pretty much from where we are at the moment, the amount of water available for use that we've got at the moment, looking at where we are and plotting ahead sort of 30 years or so, we've got to more or less triple the amount of water available to us if we don't do anything. That is the challenge. That is what we need to get from the white paper going forward. So what is our strategy? And what I must say at the outset, it's absolutely not about just building more reservoirs, more resources. It's absolutely a balanced strategy, looking at both supply and demand and attacking both sides of the equation. Clearly, leakage is terribly important for that, and pleased to say our company has met its leakage target ever since targets have been met. We're well below the economic level of leakage, but that has to continue, and that has to continue driving down. Demand management for us is about meters. We've got 3/4 of our customers currently on meters. We see that the future direction is universal metering. I think the country should start to bite that bullet and move forward with that. Universal metering and tariffs which incentivize the right behaviors from our customers. We also want to see infrastructure investment and enhancement. So our vision for the future is pretty much all of our water comes from the moorlands, from Dartmoor, for example. So we'd like to build a ring main around Dartmoor, have a strengthened spine main down to Cornwall, so that we can move water around. So if we get localized, because we've got small, narrow catchments, if we get localized areas of water stress, we can move water around. And yes, we need to develop new resources. So that's the overall strategy for water supply balance. What about simple pragmatic things? And we need to do those as well. So this is a scheme that's underway, or just about finished now, which is protecting our water supplies to the city of Exeter. It's a very simple scheme, just put a sheet pile wall around it, costs a couple of £1 million, and that will prevent a Mythe-type accident or incident happening to the city of Exeter. Another good and simple pragmatic thing that was part of our strategy, which we must do more of, this might look to you like a reservoir. It's actually one of 2 new China clay pits we've just bought. China clay pits obviously flood with water. We've plumbed those into our system now, and they have now become the 4th and 5th largest reservoir in our network of reservoirs for a fraction of the cost and nothing like the 15 years that we were talking about earlier. So simple, pragmatic things like that need to be done as well. So I hope that sets the scene of what we're looking for from the white paper. So moving on to very explicitly what South West Water would like to see in the white paper. I think the first and the most overwhelmingly message I'd like to see is we need a clear statement of policy and direction from the government. Far too much energy has been wasted in the last couple of years or so with speculation, consultants' reports, consultation documents, discussion documents, all speculating about the future. It's taken our eyes off the main challenges that are ahead of us, and we must have a white paper that's focused on the main challenges ahead of us. And I would strongly say that we would like to see practical steps in this white paper. We don't want to see more theoretical models, and I'm sorry about the economists in the audience. We don't want to see more economic models, more fancy models to drive the industry forward. We want simple, practical, pragmatic steps. It's far too important to mess around with. And fundamentally important is the fact that the whole of the success of the 20 years or so since privatization has been built on bringing private sector finance in at the lowest possible cost. We must protect the attractiveness of that investment proposition. If we mess around with that and the cost of debt or the cost of financing goes up to us, that's the biggest constraint on our ability to invest and the biggest impact on bills. And we will mess around with that at our peril. I notice David Gray's in the audience on the front row there, but the two third and fourth points go together really, which I think David Gray's report very adequately highlighted, that we must restore the primacy of the relationship between the company and the customers, and perhaps move to a more risk-based and a more output-focused base with the relationship to the regulator. Not making any valid judgments about why that's happened, but we are too focused on the regulator and not focused enough on the customers, and we must move forward with that in the white paper. So talking about affordability, as I said, Monica will pick up on this, but maintaining customers' willingness and ability to pay is fundamental to the investment required going forward. And my strongest message, South West Water's strongest message, is that investment that we require going forward cannot be constrained by the most vulnerable's ability to pay, the most vulnerable in a society's ability to pay. So what that means is we've got to get absolutely real and grown up about this. We've got to introduce social tariffs. We've got to have mechanisms to support those most vulnerable in our society so that we can invest for the future of our infrastructure at the appropriate level. So Monica will talk about that a little bit more. In terms of resilience and the resilience and increased resilience to climate change, I guess, like Martin, I've heard so many people talking about water trading, and water trading needs to be incentivized going forward. We need complicated market mechanisms to do that. Absolutely not. We have, as Martin said, we have one reservoir in our area called Wimbleball Reservoir. We own that reservoir. Half of the water we use for ourselves, half of the water goes off to Wessex Water. What's really interesting, what's really interesting, that happens all over the country, but what's really interesting, by and large, all those arrangements predate the privatisation, predate the regulatory model that we've got. So there's something happening in the regulatory model to stop us doing that still, whereas we used to do it quite naturally. So we've got to move those artificial regulatory barriers. And I personally believe it's no more complicated than the incentives for CapEx and the disincentives for OpEx. So you're incentivised to spend money, but you're incentivised to reduce your operating costs. So I think we need to move towards TOTEX and some sort of analysis of a joined OpEx CapEx balance. Also, the water resource management plans. I've also heard it said over the last 2 years or so of speculation that water companies are sitting on, abstraction license they don't need, and this is just not good enough, and we need to move forward, and therefore we need a complicated trading auction process taking time-limited abstraction licenses. I see it quite simply. We have a water resources management plan which has a 25-year horizon. We submit that to vetting for the Environment Agency and the Secretary of State signs off on it. If we're not doing the appropriate things in there, if we are sitting on abstraction licenses that we don't need, well, that should come out of that process. And if the Environment Agency or the DEFRA don't have the powers to force us to do that, well, we should give them the powers. We don't need complicated auction processes to do that. It's quite straightforward. And I think a consultant's report, I think it was done for Ofwat, suggested that we need something like 17 specific interconnectors between companies to enhance transfers to make a virtual water grid. Well, if that's the case, let's get on with designing, planning, building, and financing those 17 interconnectors. We can do that at the next price review. It's not difficult. It's perfectly straightforward. Again, we need to move on to per capita consumption. If population is going to continue to increase, we need to move on to per capita consumption. Universal metering, I've already said, appropriate price signals is definitely the way forward from our point of view. We'd like to see that in the white paper. And finally, we need to talk about moving towards a more, environmentally benign way of operating. There's another screen coming down there. An environmentally benign way of operating. So I think catchment management, there's about 100 catchment management schemes have been approved within this current AM period. Many of them are trials, tests. We need to move from there so that catchment management schemes become the norm, not the exception. So again, for example, in our particular company, we have a scheme where it's called the Myers scheme, where we re-establish in the peatlands up in the moors of Exmoor and Dartmoor. Those have been drained through government incentives since the last war, basically. And those wet sponges that used to slow down and naturally filter the water have now been removed, and we have to install complex and expensive treatments at the end of the pipe. We need to move to those being the first solution, not the last solution. So finally, I should suggest we should set ourselves, or the white paper should set the industry as a whole to a challenge. We can deliver pretty much all of this without legislation, so we should try and do that. We should deliver the new regime without legislation, and only legislation as a last resort. So that's our blueprint for what we'd like to see out of the white paper. So to summary, I think the industry has got a solid foundation. It's got this great track record of delivering the government's agenda. So if the government were to set out a clear agenda going forward, I'm quite confident we will be able to deliver it. The white paper, however, needs to be a practical roadmap. Please, no more theoretical models and interesting experiments. As I say, this is far too important a topic to get wrong. So thanks for your attention. Thank you.